and welcome back to the online learning session. Students, from today we are going to begin our revision. As you can see, this is a quick revision series and which is based on chapter 1, resources and development. So let us quickly see the topics which are going to be covered in this lesson. Number 1, the Earth Summit of 1992 and Agenda 21. Number 2, resource planning. Number 3, resource planning in India. Number 4, conservation of resources. Number 5, Club of Rome. And number 6, land resources. Students, since this is a revision series, so therefore we'll only be focusing on the finer points related to each and every topic. So let us begin our revision from the development of resources. Okay, so students, we have seen that in the due course of development of resources, human beings have used the resources indiscriminately, which has led to the following consequences. Now, what are these consequences? Number 1, depletion of resources. Number 2, accumulation of resources in a few hands. And number 3, indiscriminate exploitation of resources. But the burning question is that can equitable distribution take place due to all these factors? No. On the basis of all these three factors, all these three consequences, we cannot see development to be taking place. So therefore, if we want an equitable distribution of resources and a sustained life quality and global peace, therefore equitable distribution of resources is required. Only then we can say that the development of resources can take place in a proper way. Therefore, it becomes very essential that we plan our resources before using, therefore making the process of resource planning essential for sustainable development and sustainable existence as well. Now, when we come across the development which is sustainable, it just says that the development which takes place without harming the development in the present, and which also does not compromise with the future needs, with the future generations, is known as sustainable development. And one such important event related to sustainable development took place at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. This was known as the Earth Summit of 1992, where we see that 100 heads of states joined this summit. What was the agenda of joining this summit? This was concerned and for addressing the urgent problems of environmental protection and socio-economic development at the global level. Here, the leaders signed the Declaration on Global Climatic Change and Biological Diversity, and therefore we see that Agenda 21 was adopted. Now let us go through what was Agenda 21. First of all, Agenda 21 was a declaration which was signed by the world leaders in 1992, where it was signed at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED. Now, what are the aims of Agenda 21? It aims at achieving global sustainable development. Okay. Now, on its agenda, it also includes that it shall combat environmental damage, poverty, disease through global cooperation on common interests, mutual needs, and shared responsibilities. And one of the most important objectives of Agenda 21 was also that each and every local government should draw its own Agenda 21. So here we have picked the indiscriminate use of resources. In this we saw the consequences due to indiscriminate use of resources are: number 1, depletion of resources; number 2, accumulation; and number 3, indiscriminate exploitation. And this is how development cannot take place. So with what development can take place? We took out an equitable distribution of resources is what required for proper development to take place, and for that we need to plan our resources, therefore making the process of resource planning essential. And how we shall plan our resources? We shall plan our resources by keeping sustainable development in mind. What was one of the important events related to the sustainable development? The Earth Summit, which took place at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1992, where we draw Agenda 21 in 1992. We drew an Agenda 21 in 1992 of the objectives which have been discussed here. Next we come down to the very process of resource planning. Okay, so students, we have also seen that this is the widely accepted strategy for judicious use of resources. By judicious use of resources, what do we actually mean? By judicious use of resources, we mean that resources after planning, when exploited, should not be overexploited or underexploited, so that we use them efficiently and in a planned way. Okay, It is just regarding that it should not be overexploited. Resources must not be overexploited, or it should not remain underexploited. It should only be exploited as per the needs. Okay, next very important question, therefore, why this process of resource planning becomes important in a country like India? See students, we have already seen that India has a huge area, but that area is there with contrasting features. Therefore, we get to see that a few areas have sumptuous amount of resources. It means, that is what it means, that a few areas, a few regions are well endowed with resources, but a few areas, a few regions lack in the resources as well. Now this calls for a balanced resource planning at the national, state, regional and local levels, so that development in a proper manner is ensured in all the regions. Clear? Now we get to see the processes through which resource planning takes place in India. Okay, so we get to see that first of all, identification and inventory of resources is done. Thereafter, surveying, mapping is done, which is also referred to as quantitative and qualitative analysis. For example, if this is a region, then what do we actually do? We first of all identify, let us name this region as X. So we identify that whether there are resources in this region, yes or no. Okay, let us make a checklist. Okay, so we found that there are resources in this region. We have identified the resources. Now we need to determine the inventory of resources. That is, we mean that we need to determine the amount, the quantity of resources, and that is what is meant by quantitative analysis. Thereafter, we need to do the qualitative analysis. By that we mean, for example, if we find iron ore, and if we, let us assume that we found 10 kgs of iron ore here in the region X, so the amount has also been determined. Now the quality will be determined, that what kind of quality does this iron ore have. Next, we see that we need to evolve a planning structure, that is technology, skills and institutions. Only by identifying or discovering a resource will not lead to its development, okay, on its own. So what needs to be developed here? Along with the identification and inventory of resources, that is what we mean by finding out the resources and determining the amount in which the resources are found, we also need to evolve a planning structure. For example, we need proper technology, skills and institutions in order to exploit that resource and utilize that resource in a complete manner. Okay, then our resource planning goes through the third process, which is the matching the resource development plans with overall national development plans. Okay, let us move ahead and see resource planning in India, the state of resource planning in India now. Okay, so students, we see, as we have already discussed, that mere availability of resources in the absence of corresponding changes in technology and institutions may hinder development. It simply means that mere availability of resources in a region could not lead to the development of that region, or could not lead to the complete utilization or exploitation of that resource as well. So what we need technology, number one, and along with technology we also need some institutions, as we have learned in class 9 that these institutions are required in order for proper development of anything. Clear? So for example, if we found that we have some iron ore in this region, then we also need some institutions here. Institutions would carry out research, then institutions such as government institutions, okay, which will help us in further development of that region, which will help in providing jobs and employment. For example, if we find iron ore, then we'll also devise some methods and techniques and employ technologies to exploit that iron ore. For that we'll have to give some employment to the laborers, so we can also provide some employment to the laborers, and therefore by all that iron ore we can develop the resource. Then we see that we also have certain regions in our country which are rich in resources, but these regions are economically backward regions. A very good example of this is Jharkhand. Okay, next we see that there are also some regions which have a poor resource base, but they are economically developed. A good example would be Punjab. Now let us see why is it related to the history, okay, and how is it related to the history. So the history of colonization reveals that the rich resources in colonies were the main attractions of the foreign invaders. Therefore, we see it was primarily the high level of technological development of the colonizing countries that helped them exploit resources of their regions and establish their supremacy. So here in this article, we are trying to emphasize the importance of technology, okay, how technological development is imperative for developing of the resources of any region. So we need to establish one of the links between the colonizers, colonization and technology as well. So the British who came to India had higher level of technological development, therefore they were able to exploit the resources, utilize the resources to its full potential, and therefore establish their supremacy. Now we see that resources can contribute to development only when they are accompanied by appropriate technological development and institutional changes, okay. So that is what we take out from here. Basically, we take out the importance of technological development as well as importance of institutions being imperative, very important for the resource planning in India. Now let us move ahead and let us try to determine the importance of conservation of resources and what are the methods of resource conservation. Students, we have already seen that since resources are vital for any developmental activity, vital means very, very important, clear? So since resources are vital for any developmental activity, we need to conserve them. Whatever is important for you, that thing needs to be conserved, okay. That is why you have to understand its importance at some point of time in your life. But what do we actually see? The irrational consumption, number one, and number two, overutilization of resources may lead to socio-economic and environmental problems, which have also become major problems of resources in today's world, okay. So in order to overcome these problems, conservation at various levels is important, and we had in our previous lecture seen what was the philosophy of Gandhiji regarding this, okay, that he said that there is enough for everybody's need but not for anybody's greed, okay. He was against mass production and wanted to replace it with the production by the masses. So what do we actually take out from here? The points which are to be taken out from here relate to question number 1 here in the box which is located in the corner of your slide, okay. So it actually asks, why is conservation of resources important? So you need to approach it with different dimensions. For example, first of all, we need to see anything which is important, definitely you would be conserving that. That is why it needs to be conserved, number 1. Number 2, since that is being overexploited or that is being irrationally consumed, somewhere its exploitation is not being done in a proper way. The amount which should be exploited, the amount which should be utilized is not being done in the way as it should have been. That is why 2 consequences we see which is related to the consumption of resources have come out as irrational consumption, okay, and overutilization, which has led to another set of problems as socio-economic and environmental problems, clear? That is why we need to conserve resources. Now let us move to learning Club of Rome. Let us go through the questions quickly. What is Club of Rome? It was an institution, and still it is an institution which was created to address the multiple crises facing humanity and the planet. Students, since we are in the topic of development of resources and therefore we also learned about sustainable development, we should ask ourselves that why are we studying Club of Rome here at the same point of time while we go through question number 1. So students, because for the first time at the international level, the advocation of the resource conservation was done by this Club of Rome in 1968, way back in 1968. That is why we are going back into the history and we are taking out what was the first step, or what was one of the first steps, what was one of the major first steps which were taken in order to promote sustainable development at the global level, or at least to create some consciousness at the global level for this. It is located in Winterthur, that's in Canton, Zurich, Switzerland. Now next we move and we see the whole bunch of scientists, economists, business leaders and former politicians to be making up this institutions. Now what are the aims and objectives of this institutions? It seeks to define comprehensive solutions. Now it seeks to define comprehensive solutions. Okay, number one, it defines comprehensive solutions to the complex interconnected. Now interconnected challenge. Okay, so second point we can take out from here is the interconnected challenge. Now Club of Rome makes holistic proposals to address. Holistic means complete, which has a lot of dimensions, and let us go through the lot of dimensions, the problems which are interconnected in the fields of global warming, number one. Number two, well-being and humanitarian challenges. Okay, so definitely 3 points have been taken out from here, that first of all, the aim of Club of Rome is to seek to define comprehensive solutions to what? To interconnected challenges. Okay, what are these interconnected challenges and how are these challenges interconnected and through which fields? So they are interconnected to the fields of global warming, well-being and humanitarian. Okay, let us move ahead and let us see. First point we have already gone through, okay, that we have seen what was done in 1968. Next we need to go through, only then after 1968 it became a trend. This trend was actually established by the Club of Rome. Subsequently in 1974 we see that Schumacher also followed this trend by introducing Gandhian philosophy in his book Small is Beautiful. Next we see a very important development regarding this. The Brundtland Commission report in 1987 introduced the concept of sustainable development. Okay, the Brundtland Commission report 1987 introduces the concept of sustainable development and advocated it as a means of resource conservation. Okay, which was subsequently published in a book entitled Our Common Future. Now this, as we have come to learn, is a very important and significant event which took place back in 1987, and since then a lot of awareness and consciousness have been trying to be created among masses around the world. And another significant event thereafter which took place in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro was the Earth Summit, Brazil, 1992. Now let's move ahead. Now students, what are land resources? We know that land resources are very, very important resource because everything is being supported by land. It is everything on this earth is supported on the land. Clear? That is why it is important, as it supports natural vegetation, wildlife, human life, the economic activities of the humans. It also supports transportation and communication systems. Here when we come down to this pie chart, we see the percentage share of each type of the land resources on the surface of the earth. For example, when we come to plains, we see that 43% of the land surface is occupied by plains, 30% of the land surface or the earth surface is occupied by mountains, and the rest 27% is occupied by the plateaus. Okay, now just to see, go through the land utilization, how are different types of land being utilized. So we see that land is in the form of forests. Okay, now there are also land which is not available for cultivation. In under this section we have seen barren land and wasteland, the land which has become barren or the land which is waste. Okay, barren means it does not have fertility anymore, and wasteland you already know. Now let us see the second point. We see that land which are put to non-agricultural uses, for example these roads are used for non-agricultural activities like buildings, roads, factories, etc. Third, we come down to other uncultivated land excluding fallow land. Okay, so we see permanent pastures and grazing land. Therefore we see land under miscellaneous tree crops not included in net zone area, culturable waste land. Next, when we come down to fallow lands, we see current fallow and other than current fallow. The only point of difference, as we had discussed in our lesson regarding this chapter, was the time period. What is the time period? Okay, the time period in current fallow is for one or less than one agricultural year, while when we refer to the other than current fallow, we come to see that the time period is 1 to 5 agricultural years. Okay, now when we come down to net sown area, we learned that area sown more than once in an year plus net sown area is known as the gross cropped area. Okay, and what is known as the net zone area? I would like you people to answer me. Now let us quickly go through the topic of land degradation and conservation measures. Students, it's very important to include this topic in your development lessons because it is becoming one of the major burning issues of today. So we see human beings are dependent on land resources for each and every economic activity of theirs. Their activities have not only brought about degradation but have also aggravated the pace of natural forces. Okay, for example, what can we pick out from here? When we see that, for example, you go to a forest and there are lots of trees. So let us first of all deal with the first point. These are trees. For example, imagine these are trees. So they have not only, the human activities have not only brought about degradation. For example, if you cut down all the trees, then it is going to degrade the land, okay, because it leads to deforestation, but have also aggravated the pace of natural forces. Now what will happen? It will leave the soil to become loosened, okay. The soil will loosen up at the bottom, and thereafter, coming in the action of water or air, the soil will get eroded, eventually leading to soil erosion, and that might also occur as sheet erosion, gully erosion, and may disturb and may erode the entire land which is present there. Okay, that is why it is seen to be a grave consequence of not using the resources properly. Then we come down to activities such as deforestation, overgrazing, mining and quarrying contributed significantly in land degradation. Let us talk about mining now. Okay, so mining sites are abandoned after excavation work is complete, leaving deep scars, okay, and traces of overburdening. Okay, now the states which are related to mining, of course, logically, if you think only the states which are rich in mineral deposits will have mines, so let us go through these states. States like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, MP and Odisha face a lot of mining, okay, which has led to severe land degradation. Let us go to next point now, and in Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, we see overgrazing as one of the important reasons for land degradation. What is the important reason for land degradation in states like Punjab, Haryana, Western UP? The main cause of concern is over irrigation. So this is the main cause for the land degradation. Next, we see mineral processing is also taking place and is also a significant contributor of land degradation. And how does it actually take place? We see that in cement industry and ceramic industry, industries which are related to some minerals like cement and ceramics, we see that grinding of limestones and calcite for sandstones in ceramics industry generate huge quantity of dust. Now what will happen? This dust, when generated, will rise up in the air and therefore after some point of time will come down and settle at the bottom, okay, and will eventually settle on the ground and also get suspended in the atmosphere. So what happens when it gets suspended on the land? When it gets settled on the land, the surface of the earth, what happens? It actually retards the process of infiltration of water into the soil after it settles on the land, we have seen, and industrial effluents such as waste have become a major source of land and water pollution in many parts of the country. So this is how it actually affects the land, by affecting the process of infiltration. So how can we conserve land? What are the conservation measures that should be adopted by us in order to conserve our land? So let us go through them. Afforestation, number one, as you know, that planting more and more saplings. Number two, proper management of grazing. We should always keep that grazing remains in check, okay, so that it doesn't leave the ground prone to soil erosion. Third, we see that planting of shelter belts of plants should take place. Fourth, we see that stabilization of sand dunes. While we were learning about the erosion related to wind, we see that it leads to de-stabilization of sand dunes, okay. A lot of sand dunes take place in the desert areas, so we can try to stabilize those dunes. Next, we see that proper management of wastelands. Okay, so this is one of the points which we are very close to, as even when you come to school you can see a lot of lands which is degraded, a lot of land which is wasteland, which has been converted into a wasteland by dumping a lot of garbage which are collected from your cities. Next we see that mining activities must be controlled. Okay, and seventh, we see that proper discharge and disposal of industrial effluents. It should be discharged properly and it should be disposed of properly. Effluents here means industrial wastage. Okay, so that is how we come to the end of this lesson, and we'll be moving further in the next lesson. All the lessons from here, at least 2-3 lessons, will be based on revision, so please come prepared in the class. Thank you.